We're going to move on to agenda setting here. This once again is Mr. Vanderpool talking about the presidency. So, the president can control public policy and discussion through several things, through the media. Presidents have a lot of access to the media. The media wants to know what the president has to say. The president can help control public policy through the State of the Union speech. This speech comes from Article 2, Section 3, which stipulates the president must from time to time give information to Congress regarding the State of the Union. The president makes policy proposals, encourages the Congress to pass his or her legislation. I've already talked about how the president is going to assemble a budget, particularly the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, is going to assemble a budget that gets submitted to Congress for approval. Now, let's look at executive orders, another major thing that the president can do. Presidents issue executive orders that have the force of law. So, this derives from the power to enforce the Constitution, to enforce treaties, laws, etc. The president has this power, and so therefore they can do this through executive order. So, for example, FDR allowed the Japanese internment through executive orders. Truman integrated the military through executive order. Eisenhower desegregated public schools through executive order. Now, the thing about executive orders is the next president can issue an executive order to get rid of the old executive order. So they generally will only stick through a certain president unless the next president wants to issue the same order or doesn't want to overturn the order. Now, another power that the president used to have, or that was hotly debated for a time, was the line item veto. So the idea behind the line item veto is a line item veto basically says that the president can veto some parts of the bill and leave the others intact. So the question was raised, should the president be able to veto certain parts of the bill, but not other parts? The Line Item Veto Act of 1996 attempted to create this line item veto. Clinton versus the City of New York in 1997 found that law unconstitutional. Now, one of the things presidents have to deal with is gridlock and divided government. Divided government exists when the president and the Congress, particularly the congressional majority, represent different political parties. So the president is a Republican and the congressional majority is a Democrat, or vice versa. This creates what's called gridlock, the inability to accomplish goals because the president can't push the legislation through a legislature of the opposite ideology. So there are pros and cons for this. So the con is the operation of the government will shut down in the sense that no new legislation, or let's not say no, let's say a small amount of legislation, a smaller than possible amount of legislation will make it through the Congress and the president. The pro is it slows the decision-making process, and it is a great example of checks and balances. Now, let's look at the vice president. The vice president presides over the Senate. There's a tie-breaking vote if there's a 50-50 tie in the Senate. They take over the presidency if the president cannot finish his or her term. An important amendment regarding the vice president is the 12th Amendment, which said that voters choose the president and the vice president together. Previous to 1804, the losing candidate in a presidential election became the vice president. All right, so let's look at the White House office here. Now, there's a couple of ways that the president can set up their White House office. One model is the pyramid model. So assistants answer to a hierarchy up to the chief of staff. So the chief of staff is the member of a president's team that basically manages the staff of the president. So with a pyramid model, all the assistants are going to answer to the chief of staff, and then the chief of staff is going to communicate to the president. So the chief of staff is going to have a lot of power. So there's going to be a few top advisors to the president. The president is relatively free, but isolated, because the president is generally talking to the chief of staff and not all the advisors, because all the advisors are talking to the chief of staff. Then you have the circular model. So here you have direct contact. The president has direct contact with staff. There's going to be many top advisors to the president. The president is going to be very busy because he's talking with a whole bunch of people, but it's going to be very connected to his advisors. So the significance of this is it determines what aides have the most influence on presidential decisions. In an elite model, in a pyramid model, only the elite, particularly the chief of staff, are going to have that influence on the president. In a circular model, you're going to have more aides that have influence on presidential decisions. All right, let's look at the executive office of the president here. These are some of the most important offices. National Security Council advises on military and foreign policy. Office of Management and Budget prepares the national budget. It's the largest office. National Economic Council advises with economic planning. Also very important is the president's cabinet. There's 15 major departments advising the president in issues that are their specialty. You also have what's called the inner cabinet, which are considered the most important cabinet positions. So you have the Secretary of State, who is basically U.S.'s top diplomat. You have the Treasury Secretary, make sure the United States pays its bills. You have the Attorney General, which is the top cop. And then you have the Secretary of Defense, which leads the military. So here, the two men pictured below are John Kerry, who is the Secretary of State during the Obama administration, and Chuck Hagel, who is the Secretary of Defense also during the Obama administration. All right, let's look at presidential disability and succession. So the 22nd Amendment, important amendment, it limited the president to 2 terms, and you can't serve more than 10 years. So if a president takes over in the first term, they still cannot serve more than 10 years. So they could serve up to 2 years and then 2 terms. But if they're over halfway through that first term when they take over, they're only going to be able to stay 1 more term because you can't serve more than 10 years. The 25th Amendment says that if the vice president is if the vice president office is vacated, then the president can select a new vice president, which needs to be confirmed by both chambers of Congress. All right, so finally we have impeachment. Presidents can be impeached, so can judges. There's various officials that can be impeached. But when a president gets impeached, it is always a big deal. So this is how it works. So the House is going to impeach. The Senate is going to try the president. The Chief Justice will preside of the Supreme Court, is going to preside over the trial. So 2 presidents have been impeached and neither removed. That's Andrew Johnson as well as Bill Clinton, at least At the time of this video, only 2 presidents have been impeached. Nixon, of course, was not impeached because he stepped down before impeachment. So you might ask yourself, why is it that a president would be impeached? Well, if the Congress is convinced that the president has committed treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, this is according to Article 2, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, and the punishment for impeachment is removal from office. All right, let's look at the assessment here. So we're going to describe the 4 major powers held by the president, the first one being the military power. You can describe that as well as the other 3. Then we describe the process by which someone can be impeached, particularly a president. What is that process by which they're impeached? We just talked about that. We can pause it and move on here. So in a paragraph, we're going to describe what we've learned today. See you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.